So we are now on Acts chapter 20, we think. And last time, whenever we were in Acts 19, we left off where we were in the city of Ephesus and Demetrius, remember we had that quiz question the other day? Demetrius was the silversmith who was really upset that they were losing money because Paul is out there preaching that, Diana might not be a real God. It might be there's only one true God. And of course, that's Jesus Christ. So Paul's out there convincing the people to turn away, and Demetrius is like, guys, let's get all the silversmiths together. Let's go and get rid of this Paul. So they want to supposedly honor Diana, but really they wanted to honor their own pockets. They wanted to make sure they made money. So there was a big riot. They brought the people to the town square, and everybody's cheering, "Great is Diana, great is Diana." And Paul was going to go in to where they had captured a few of the other Christians, but the disciples said, "No, don't go." They wouldn't let him go. And the town clerk finally settles the mob down and tells them, "Guys, what are you worried about? Let's do this lawfully, because if we riot like this, the Romans are going to come down hard on us, right? So let's do this lawfully. Let's do it right." And he said, "If there's an issue you want to address, let's address it in a calm manner, and we can have Demetrius come and make his argument." So the people finally dispersed. But unfortunately, it became clear to Paul that the effectiveness and safety of his ministry wasn't going to be able to continue in Ephesus at this time. So at that point, they decide, okay, maybe it's time to go somewhere else. Now, remember, he's been in Ephesus for 3 years at this point. So this is a pretty long period of time he was there, and he's really made some changes in this city. And I would just pause to say, would any one of us living in one city for 3 years cause such an uproar because of how effectively we're preaching the gospel? I hope that's the case. Unfortunately, for many of us, it's not. We kind of get complacent and just, we live our own sheltered lives in our living room, whereas maybe we should be out there like Paul, changing the world to where the people are driving us out of the city. I've heard so many Christians say, "Oh, I don't want to offend anybody." How many people think Paul was really concerned about offending people? No, he wasn't trying to offend them, but he was out preaching the truth. And if the truth offends you, okay. I don't think he really cared, right? He went out and told the truth. Okay. So getting to chapter 20, let's read the first 3 verses. It says, "And after the uproar was ceased, Paul called unto him the disciples and embraced them and departed for to go into Macedonia. And when he had gone over those parts and had given them much exhortation, he came into Greece and there abode 3 months. When the Jews had laid wait, and when the Jews laid wait for him, as he was about to sail into Syria, he purposed to return through Macedonia." So Macedonia is the northern area of Greece, okay? And Paul's intention, every time he had the opportunity, when there was a feast in Israel, when there was Passover, when there was Pentecost, he always wanted to go back to Jerusalem because that was the commandment the Bible had given the Jews. You keep the feast, and if you're at all able, you work your way to Jerusalem to celebrate them there. So he had planned to do it. And we know from other letters to the other churches, he had planned to do it and to take money to the church at Jerusalem, which was struggling financially, right? So he was going to go there. He had taken this collection, and we find passages like in the book of Corinthians where he says, "Hey, when you guys come together on the first day of the week, make sure you make a collection so that when I come, we don't have to make a special collection. Set aside money as God has prospered you." And that way he'd have some money to take to that church in Jerusalem. So again, he's up here, he's in Macedonia, and the churches that are in this region are the Philippian church, the Thessalonians, they're up there, and the Bereans are all up there, right? He spends about 3 months, and there he finds out the Jews know he's planning to sail back to Syria to get to Jerusalem. And they're planning to ambush him. Do you guys think that traveling on a ship with a bunch of Jews that want to throw you overboard sounds like a good time? No, he figured out they're trying to ambush him. So he's like, well, you know what? Maybe this time I'll miss Passover. So he decides not to sail as he was planning to down to Syria, right? And again, this threat on his life led to a number of the fellow believers traveling with him, probably in part to keep him safe. And we're going to see from the next few verses, they came from the various different churches and regions that he had went out and preached. So verse 4 through 6 says, And there accompanied him into Asia Sopater of Berea, so the Bereans are represented, and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timotheus, and of Asia, Tychicus and Trophimus. I don't know if I'm saying that, Tychicus, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Those going before tarried for us at Troas, and we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. So you notice the trip took 5 days, right, as they were traveling. And this same trip, whenever Paul took it earlier in the book of Acts, only took 2 days. So a 2-day trip became a 5-day trip, which tells you that it must have been maybe rough waters, maybe the wind was contrary to them. And that just also should let you know that whether the way that we go is easy or whether the way that we go is hard does not determine if it's God's will for us to go that way. God doesn't say any direction you go is going to be easy. Doesn't say the way you live or where you go and preach is going to be easy. But if he calls you to do something, you do it, whether you face opposition or you don't. So Paul, he missed the Passover. He sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. So if you remember the feasts of Israel, there was the Passover and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was the 7 days following. And in somewhere during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it differed from year to year, the Feast of First Fruits would happen, which would be the first Sunday after Passover. Whenever Jesus had died on Passover, that particular year, he rose 3 days later, which happened to be on the Feast of First Fruits. And that's why he's called our first fruit, right? So that's something we can look into again later sometime if you guys want to go through the Feast of Israel again. So anyway, now we're going to go and see what the life of believers in Troas was like. Okay, so here we're going to see what the believers in Troas, how they dealt with things. So it's on verse 7 says, upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow. And he continued his speech until midnight. And there were many lights in the upper chamber where they were gathered together. So do you know when they met? First day of the week, right? The Corinthians met the first day of the week. The Troas Christians met the first day of the week. A lot of people say, well, why do Christians meet the first day of the week? Why don't they meet on the Sabbath, right? Isn't that in the Ten Commandments? Well, the Ten Commandments certainly do. They are one of the feasts of Israel. The Sabbath is the feast of Israel and the feast of God even. But they were commanded to the people of Israel. So the early church, which was made up of partially Jews and partially Gentiles, the Jews would go to synagogue on the Sabbath. They would hear the preaching, they'd have their feasts on the Sabbath, and they would not be able to meet with the Gentiles. But on the first day of the week, the following day, they would meet with their Gentile brethren. And that's when the official church gatherings were, where they would break bread and have their meals. And of course, take communion. So again, the Gentile church was never commanded to keep the Sabbath. You remember back in Acts 15, whenever they were trying to figure out what do we do with all these Gentile believers, they said, okay, let's just give them these 4 rules. Don't eat things strangled, don't eat things offered to idols, don't eat blood, and abstain from fornication. They never mentioned the Sabbath to them because, again, it wasn't commanded to them. So whatever day we worship to the glory of God. And Paul makes that very clear in many of his letters. He says, don't let anyone judge you on your Sabbath, on your keeping of holy days, whether you esteem one day greater than another day. That doesn't matter. Everything we do is to the glory of God. So they would gather, they'd break bread, which typically includes, if it doesn't mean exclusively, communion. They would take communion to remind the people of the great sacrifice Jesus had done for them, and they would enjoy this meal together. They would have fellowship. So here's Paul, who starts preaching on their service. And he keeps preaching till midnight. And you think he's done then? No, he wants to continue. There's just a little break in his sermon. He has a little intermission. So if you guys think I can talk for a while, imagine when I go to one of Paul's Bible studies. Now, I'm not going to point fingers at anybody in this room named Paul, but there's a guy that falls asleep in the middle of the talk, okay? And Anyway,
I have no idea.
I have no clue who that could be. So let's see in verse 9 what this guy named Paul Bob is. And there sat in a window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, so even Mark, who's writing this down, it's like, man, he just went, oh, excuse me, Luke, he just went on and on and on. He was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the third loft and was taken up dead, died on impact. Now, not that anyone has ever had trouble falling asleep during one of our Bible studies, but it could happen. But this young man, Luke made sure to record his name so that we would all know when we get to heaven, hey, that's the guy that fell asleep. Now, again, why is his name even recorded here? Why not just say a young man? Again, I believe the reason is I believe the book of Acts was written as a legal defense of Paul when he was on trial before Caesar. And he was giving the names of the witnesses who could verify the story if they needed it. I think that's the reason it's actually recorded. So again, this would be significant. So we go to verse 10. It says, Paul went down. So he had to take a break during his preaching. He preached till midnight. This guy fell off and died. And Paul's like, seriously now? I was just getting to the good part. So he gets down, finds this guy, and he fell on him, embracing him and said, trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. And he performs this miracle, just similar to Elisha's miracle in the Old Testament, where he resurrects that Shunammite woman's son. And again, God is allowing him to bring this man back from the dead to show God's approval and authority that he put on Paul to preach this gospel, right? Imagine you're listening to the Bible study and you're like, I don't know if this guy knows what he's talking about. Then he resurrects a guy right there. You know what? Maybe I will listen to what this guy has to say, right? He adds a little oomph behind the message, doesn't it? So we go to verse 11. It says, when he therefore was come up again and had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, even till the break of day, so he departed. Paul continued his sermon till the sun rose. He started the day before. Talk about your Bible study. I would love to have the notes of that study. Just there's a handful of things in the Bible that I wish we had more records of, and this is one of them, right? This is just great.
And Jesus, Bible study on the road to Emmaus.
Yes, right. You know, he expounded many things. Well, just jot them down. Like, tell me what those many things were. So, anyways, so he took that break, he resurrected someone, went right on talking. And then in verse 12 it says, and they brought the young man alive and were not a little comforted. So everyone's happy that this young man comes back from the dead. They're happy that Paul came and preached. I suspect that there's only one guy in this whole event that wasn't very happy. I think Eutychus was not very happy. Imagine being born again, dying, that's terrible, but now you're in the presence of God. I mean, imagine if right now I drop dead and then all of a sudden I wake up to see Shane looking at me. I would be like, seriously? Like, seriously? But, he probably wouldn't be that excited, right? Or I wouldn't be that excited. So the point is, again, we don't know that he was with God, but we know that to die, right, absent from the body, present with the Lord. So I have no reason to think he didn't get to go, but obviously God had a longer plan for him, and he went back, of course, and lived his life. So now we go back to verse 13, and we're going to see they're going to continue on their trip. And we went before to ship and sailed unto Assos, there intending to take in Paul, for so he had appointed, minding himself to go afoot. And when he met with us at Assos, we took him in and came to Mytilene. So the trip from Troas to Assos is about 20 miles by land, but because you're sailing around a cape, it's about 30 miles by sea. So it actually takes, it's a longer distance to sail. And Paul decided, you know what? I want to walk it. I'll meet you guys as you come back around. I'll get in the boat with you and we'll go.
After he's been up all night.
After he's been up all night. And I think that there's nothing in this particular passage that teaches this, but I do think there's something to be said for Christians. It is very good to have fellowship. It is very good to meet with other believers. It's very good to come to Bible studies, very good to go to church. But it's also very good to just put you alone with God It's good to find your garden like Jesus would go often and pray in the night. It's good to take that walk alone with the Lord. You're not just walking for your health, you're walking to talk to God, to meditate on his word. I think that's a very valuable thing that many Christians kind of lose because with technology and everything else, we get so busy. We find so many other things to fill our day. If we step away and we didn't take our phone with us, we're like, oh shoot, where's my phone? I got to go back and get it. No, if you step away without your phone, that's a good thing. That's time you can spend between you and the Lord. And I think that's something Paul probably did back then. He left his phone at Assos. Anyways, so verse 15 and 16, and then we'll call it a night. Says, and we sailed thence and came the next day over against Chios. And the next day we arrived at Samos and tarried at Trogyllium. And the next day we came to Miletus. For Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem at the day of Pentecost. So when he arrives there, he's like, I don't have time to go to Ephesus, but I promised those guys I would come back and talk to them, right? So he actually is going to send for the leaders at Ephesus, and they're going to make the 20 or 30-mile trip to come down and talk with him. And he's going to give them pretty much a farewell speech, because he knows when he goes back to Jerusalem, he probably ain't coming back. He knows this is probably the end of the road for him, and he's okay with that. But he was so seemingly frustrated that he didn't make it to the Passover because of the Jews. He wanted to be sure he wasn't going to miss the Feast of Pentecost, because he was far more interested in being obedient to God's commands than worrying about saving his own skin and making sure that, he's comfortable. And again, I think the church today maybe gets this kind of backwards. We're worried about our comfort and what we can do to make our lives better rather than glorifying God. So we'll pick up next time with verse 17, and we'll kind of go through this conversation he has with the Ephesian elders. And from there, we'll go through. Any final thoughts or questions on the first 16 verses of chapter 20? All right. Rule is, even good Bible students fall asleep during good Bible studies, right? All right, guys, thanks for coming out.